Welcome to LatinoAmericans with your host and narrator, Jacqueline Torres.
Everything you need to know about Latino history by the author Emilce Novas. She is an expert in Latino history, culture, literature, and human rights. We will start today with Puerto Ricans. What is Puerto Rico? Quick. Name a place that's erroneously called a country, whose residents are American citizens but are barred from voting in U.S. presidential elections, do not pay federal income tax, and yet can be drafted by the U.S. military, whose capital city is nearly 100 years older than Jamestown, whose currency is the U.S. dollar, and whose people are totally fluent in Spanish and, in many, many cases, in English, and are fiercely proud of their land and their rich African, native, and Spanish heritage. If you answered Puerto Rico, you are familiar with some of the numerous contradictions that characterize the history and political status of this earthly paradise and unincorporated, organized U.S. territory known officially as the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, which lies approximately 1,000 miles southeast of Miami and is comprised of the island of Puerto Rico, measuring about 100 miles long and 35 miles wide, and the offshore islands of Vieques, Mona, and Culebra. The early history of why do Puerto Ricans call their island Borinquen. Borinquen, which means the land of the brave Lord, is the name given Puerto Rico by its indigenous inhabitants, the Tainos, who were a subgroup of the Arawak, the collective name of the Amerindians inhabiting the West Indies, the islands in the Caribbean Sea, which are divided into the Lesser Antilles, Great Antilles, and the Bahamas. The Taino, a seafaring people, inhabited not just Puerto Rico, but the other islands of the Greater Antilles, Cuba, Jamaica, and Hispaniola, as well as the Bahamas and some of the islands of the Lesser Antilles, an island group to the east and south of Puerto Rico. In actuality, the native peoples of Puerto Rico did not call themselves Taino before the Spanish conquest of the Americas. Christopher Columbus christened this subgroup of Arawak Indians Taino, meaning peace, because it was the first word they uttered when they laid eyes on the conquistador. The Taino were peaceful people indeed. They fished, hunted, and gathered pineapples and other fruits in their land of plenty. They slept in hamacas, a word that entered the English language as hammock. Another word with Taino roots is hurricane, from huracán, the god of ferocious winds, whom the Taino understood no one would ever tame. Incidentally, in addition to Puerto Rican and Puertorriqueño, Puerto Ricans call themselves Boricua, from Borinquen, especially on the U.S. mainland, to reinforce cultural ties and reaffirm ancient roots. How did San Juan come to be called Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico San Juan? It all began on November 19, 1493, when Christopher Columbus, back in the New World on his second voyage, made landfall on Puerto Rico. Columbus was impressed with the wealth of Borinquen, with its lush vegetation and more than 200 species of birds. He immediately took possession of the island in the name of Isabella I and Ferdinand II of Spain, calling it San Juan Bautista, after John the Baptist, and Isabella I and Ferdinand II's son Juan. At first, the island of San Juan Bautista was ignored, for the most part, by the Spanish, who had bigger fish to fry in Mexico and Peru. As for Columbus, he was more interested in Hispaniola and did not settle Puerto Rico. That job was left to the Spanish conquistador Juan Ponce de León, who, in 1508, was dispatched with a crew of 50 to explore the island and determine whether it harbored any gold. There was very little of the precious metal to speak of, as the Spanish discovered later, but the minute Ponce de León glimpsed the bay at San Juan, he exclaimed, "Ay, que Puerto Rico! Oh, what a rich port!" From that moment on, the island was known as Puerto Rico, and the port where Ponce de León anchored as San Juan, short for San Juan Bautista. San Juan, of course, was designated the capital of Puerto Rico and remains so to this day. The Spaniards quickly gained control of the island, and in 1509, Ponce de León was appointed the first governor of Puerto Rico, serving at that post until 1512. The island's second largest city and the hometown of thousands of mainland Puerto Ricans still bears his name, Ponce.
Thank you for listening to Latino Americans with your host and narrator, Jacqueline Torres.